Welcome back to Shadows of Justice. If you thought the first part of this story was unsettling, what you're about to hear is far darker. Last time we watched the angelic mask of Evelyn Shaw begin to crack. Small discrepancies, quiet whispers, and one tragic death that exposed the first glimpse of a deadly obsession. But in part 2, the storm truly begins. Families start asking the questions Evelyn hoped they'd never ask. Doctors uncover anomalies that shouldn't exist. And detectives step into St. Mary's Hospice to investigate a nurse who believed she could control life, death, and the truth itself. If you're returning for the second part, drop a comment saying, "I'm here for part 2, so I know my real ones made it back." And if you're new, hit subscribe, because this is where the story takes its darkest turn. Now, let's pick up where we left off. The angel of room 9 is under investigation, and her miracles are about to collapse.
The story of the miracle worker was no longer untouchable. Lydia's death, though tragic, would plant the first seeds of investigation. Every chart, every altered dosage, every manipulated moment would now be scrutinized, and the angel of room 9, for the first time, felt the weight of human judgment pressing down on her. The fluorescent lights of St. Mary's Hospice flickered faintly in the early morning, casting long shadows across the polished floors. The quiet hum of monitors had been replaced by an undercurrent of tension, a silent acknowledgement that something had shifted in room 9. Evelyn Shaw moved through the corridors with her usual calm, her white uniform pristine, her expression serene. But inside, a storm of anxiety churned beneath the surface. The death of Lydia Moore had sent ripples through the hospital, and whispers of concern began to thread their way through the staff. Nurses exchanged furtive glances, physicians furrowed brows over patient charts. Even administrators felt the first twinge of unease. Evelyn, who had once been untouchable, was now under scrutiny. Subtle at first, almost imperceptible, but relentless. Hospital administrators, concerned about potential liability, began a quiet audit. Every chart Evelyn had touched over the past months was examined. Medication logs were meticulously compared to recorded vitals. Nursing notes were cross-referenced with lab results. The findings were alarming. Small discrepancies, morphine doses slightly elevated, oxygen levels stabilized beyond expected norms, vitals inconsistent with recorded times, painted a troubling pattern. Nothing screamed malice, but the sheer volume of anomalies suggested something more than human error. A senior nurse reviewing patient files whispered to a colleague, This isn't right. She's been doing this for months." Administrators decided to confront Evelyn directly. In a private office, her supervisor laid out the discrepancies. Evelyn listened, expression calm, almost serene. When asked to explain, she didn't panic. She spoke softly, rationally. "I was giving them hope, comfort, mercy. These patients were dying, afraid, alone. I only wanted to ease their suffering." Her words, carefully measured, held a disarming power. They painted her as compassionate, even heroic. But the nagging questions persisted. How much of her intervention was care, and how much had crossed the line into manipulation, or worse?
The hospital quickly contacted law enforcement. Detectives arrived, reviewing the audit and speaking with staff. Evelyn maintained her composure, answering questions calmly, presenting herself as the devoted nurse she had always been. Detectives began digging into patient histories, identifying a troubling pattern. Every patient under Evelyn's care who had experienced unexpected improvement, or whose death had been sudden and unaligned with medical expectations, was connected to her shifts. Forensic toxicology was ordered, and medication inventories were scrutinized. The more the investigators uncovered, the clearer the pattern became. Morphine levels in multiple deceased patients were elevated beyond prescribed limits. Vital signs recorded in charts often didn't match electronic readings. Progress notes described miraculous recoveries that, upon closer inspection, never occurred. Each revelation drew the net tighter around Evelyn Shaw. The angel of room 9, whose touch had been celebrated, was now seen through a different lens, meticulous, calculating, and dangerously obsessed with controlling outcomes. Families began to sense something was wrong. One by one, they were contacted for interviews. Parents, like Lydia Moore's, confronted the hospital with grief and confusion, seeking answers to questions that had long haunted them. How did this happen? Why did she die after seeming to improve? Evelyn met them with the same calm demeanor, offering comfort and carefully chosen words. She insisted that her actions had been merciful, that she had only sought to provide hope, closure, and dignity. But to the families, the veneer of compassion began to crack. Some believed her intentions were pure but misguided. Others saw manipulation and, in Lydia's case, a deadly miscalculation. The detectives began building their case methodically. They traced patterns across months of Evelyn's shifts, compared her actions with patient outcomes, and documented every anomaly. The evidence was subtle yet compelling. She had been bending reality to fit her narrative of the miraculous nurse. As the investigation deepened, Evelyn's psyche became a point of fascination and horror for those observing her. Colleagues described her as compassionate, meticulous, and almost otherworldly in her ability to calm fear and pain. But the detectives recognized a darker undercurrent, an obsession with admiration, a need to be indispensable, a compulsion to manipulate reality itself. Her justifications were eerily consistent. She was providing hope, offering mercy, comforting the dying. But the forensic data told a different story. In her pursuit of godlike control, she had tampered with medication, falsified records, and, most tragically, contributed to preventable deaths. The courtroom smelled of polished wood and tense expectation, a quiet storm of whispered conversations and shifting chairs. Evelyn Shaw entered with her signature calm, a faint smile playing across her lips, as if the angel of room 9 could walk untouched through any storm. But inside, a complex battle raged: pride, fear, and a desperate need to maintain the illusion of control. For years, she had manipulated reality with precision, bending charts, adjusting medication, and creating moments of hope that seemed miraculous. Now she faced the undeniable scrutiny of law, evidence, and the grieving families whose trust she had shattered. The detectives had built their case meticulously. Every patient record, every medication log, every subtle anomaly in charts had been documented. Toxicology reports revealed elevated morphine levels in multiple deceased patients. Forensic analysis linked her interventions directly to outcomes that ranged from suspiciously rapid improvement to sudden death. Evelyn was formally charged with manslaughter for Lydia Moore, medical fraud, and tampering with hospital records. The charges hung over her like a storm cloud she could no longer control. For the first time in years, she could not orchestrate the narrative. The angel of room 9 was exposed as something else entirely, a woman whose need for admiration had crossed into deadly obsession. Detectives presented the evidence piece by piece: altered charts, adjusted medication doses, falsified recovery notes. Families testified, recounting the hope they had been given and the grief they ultimately endured. One father, tears streaking his face, spoke of the evening his mother passed. "She told me Mom smiled, that she whispered goodbye to us, but it was all a lie. I clung to it, and now I know." Evelyn remained composed, though inside she wrestled with a creeping sense of exposure. In her mind, she had acted out of mercy. She had comforted, soothed, and given hope. Could that not count for something? But the prosecution framed her actions differently. "This is not mercy. This is manipulation. A woman so desperate to feel divine that she played God, with lives as her instruments."
Witnesses described Evelyn as both miracle worker and manipulator. Nurses admitted to noticing discrepancies in charts. Doctors spoke of vitals that defied logic, and families detailed the emotional highs and crushing lows orchestrated by her interventions. The courtroom buzzed with tension, the air thick with disbelief and sorrow. Evelyn's defense tried to argue her intentions, that she acted out of compassion, that she provided comfort in a world where death was inevitable. But the evidence was overwhelming. No longer could she hide behind soft words or serene composure. The numbers, the charts, the toxicology reports, they painted a different truth. Her need for control had become lethal.
In private moments between court sessions, Evelyn began to crack. The meticulously crafted angel was replaced by a woman confronting the consequences of obsession. She admitted, in fragments, to the thrill of being needed, the rush of admiration, and the intoxicating sense of power her interventions provided. Yet she never fully admitted malice. She rationalized, pleaded, and whispered the same words she had told families for years. "I only wanted to give them hope. I only wanted to comfort them." For the jury, the distinction between intent and action mattered less than the outcome. Several patients were dead, their deaths connected to Evelyn's unauthorized manipulations. After 6 hours of deliberation, the jury returned. The foreperson stood, voice steady. "We, the jury, find the defendant, Evelyn Shaw, guilty on all counts." The courtroom exhaled collectively. Families wept, staff whispered, and Evelyn lowered her head, finally confronting the reality she had so long evaded. Sentencing followed. Evelyn Shaw received 35 years in prison, stripped of her license and banned from practicing medicine for life. Her era as the Angel of Room 9 was over, replaced by a legacy of caution, sorrow, and the sobering truth that even good intentions can become deadly when twisted by pride and obsession. At sentencing, Lydia Moore's mother spoke through tears. "You told me my daughter smiled before she died. That was your lie. But I forgive you, because now I know no one can control life or death, not even you." Other families nodded quietly, some unable to speak, their grief mingling with relief. The angel had fallen, and justice, however delayed, had arrived. The late afternoon sun filtered through the tall windows of St. Mary's Hospice, casting a golden light across the polished floors. The halls were quieter now, stripped of the tension and whispers that had once accompanied Evelyn Shaw's presence. Room 9, once her stage for miracles and manipulation, had been repurposed, a silent testament to the lives touched and damaged by her obsession. Outside, the world had moved on. Yet the ripple of her actions remained. Families still grieved, and the memory of loss lingered in the spaces where hope had been carefully manufactured. But justice had arrived. Evelyn Shaw, once the angel of Room 9, had been sentenced to 35 years in prison, stripped of her medical license, and barred from practicing in any medical capacity for life. The hospital had changed, policies rewritten, oversight tightened, and staff were trained to question anomalies rather than assume benevolence. Room 9 was renamed the Lydia Moore Memorial Ward, a permanent reminder that even in places of healing, vigilance is essential. Administrators and nurses reflected on Evelyn's tenure with a mixture of disbelief and relief. How had one person, celebrated as a savior, manipulated the very system meant to protect the vulnerable? The answer lay in human psychology, unchecked obsession, and the seductive thrill of power masquerading as kindness. For the families, the courtroom's verdict offered more than justice. It provided closure. Lydia Moore's parents returned to the hospital one quiet afternoon, placing flowers on a small memorial plaque. Other families followed, leaving notes, photographs, and tokens of remembrance. Each act was a quiet assertion that their loved ones would not be forgotten, and that the manipulation of hope could not erase their lives or their memories. One mother spoke softly, her fingers brushing a polished stone. "You may have fooled us, but you cannot erase the love we carry for them." Even in grief, there was resilience, a stark contrast to Evelyn's hollow pursuit of validation. In prison, Evelyn continued to work in the infirmary, tending to the ill and elderly under strict supervision. But the thrill of control, the intoxicating rush of admiration was gone. The lives she had manipulated were beyond her reach, and the careful orchestration of miracles that had defined her identity was stripped away. She never spoke publicly about her past actions, never attempted to justify herself beyond the sterile walls of her cell. For Evelyn, the angel had fallen. The need for adulation, once her driving force, was replaced by silence, reflection, and the stark consequences of her obsession. The story of Evelyn Shaw resonated beyond St. Mary's. It became a cautionary tale for medical institutions, a study in the psychology of obsession, and a reminder that even well-intentioned actions can become deadly when pride and loneliness dominate. The community erected memorials, established scholarships in memory of victims like Lydia Moore, and trained staff to question anomalies and advocate for transparency. Hope, they realized, must be rooted in honesty, not manipulation. Compassion without ethics, they learned, can be lethal. In the quiet of the memorial ward, a single white rose rested on a windowsill, untouched by time or circumstance. It symbolized both loss and remembrance, a delicate balance of grief and hope. Evelyn Shaw's story lingered like a shadow in the halls, an enduring warning that when mercy becomes manipulation and hope becomes a lie, justice eventually pierces the veil. For the families, the staff, and the wider world, the lesson was clear. No one, not even the most revered angel, can control life or death or the perception of reality without consequence. And somewhere in the stillness of the hospital, a soft murmur of memory whispered through the halls. Compassion must walk hand in hand with integrity, or the cost is far too high. The angel of Room 9 had fallen, but the legacy of vigilance, ethical care, and remembrance would endure.
Evelyn Shaw may have fallen, but the questions she leaves behind are darker than her crimes. How far should mercy go? And when does comfort become control? Let me know your answer in the comments. And if this case gripped you like it did me, hit subscribe, because the next story is even more unsettling. This is Shadows of Justice. Thanks for watching.